Who are you hiding from?" Victoria Harrison flinched like he'd struck her. Then she grabbed his arm in the dark and pulled him close enough that he could feel her hands shaking through his sleeve. "If you knew," she whispered, "you'd ride away and never look back." William Cooper had every reason to do exactly that. He didn't. And what he discovered about this woman changed everything he believed about trust, justice, and what a man is actually worth. If you've ever trusted the wrong person and lost everything because of it, this story is for you. Subscribe, hit the bell, and stay until the very end. Then drop a comment telling us what city you're watching from tonight. The night William Cooper found her, it hadn't rained in 11 days. That detail would matter later. It always did. In Montana, the weather kept time better than any clock, and men who worked the land learned to read it the way other men read newspapers. 11 days without rain meant the creek at the north edge of his property had dropped low enough to cross on foot, which meant the fence line he'd been meaning to check for 3 weeks was now the most vulnerable stretch of the Double C Ranch's boundary, which meant William had a reason to be out there at 9:30 on a Tuesday night when any sane man would have been asleep. He almost missed her entirely. She was pressed against the wooden gatepost on the east side, half hidden by the shadow of the fence itself, and she was absolutely still in the way that animals go still when they've decided that moving will only make things worse. William's horse felt her before William saw her. Cutter threw his head sideways and blew a hard breath through his nose, and William had just enough instinct left from 20 years of ranching to pull up short instead of spurring forward. He sat there for a long moment listening. The crickets had gone quiet on the left side of the fence line. That meant someone or something had disturbed them recently, moving from the direction of the main road. William reached down and rested his hand on the rifle scabbard without drawing. "I can hear you breathing," he said to the darkness in general. "Might as well come out where I can see you're not about to do something stupid." Nothing moved. "I'm not going to shoot a person," he added. "I've only ever shot at things that were actively trying to kill my livestock, and I'm willing to extend that policy to strangers at my gate. But I need you to give me the same courtesy." There was a long pause. Then a woman's voice came out of the shadow, low-controlled, and carrying the particular flatness of someone who had learned to speak without giving anything away. "Is there anyone else with you?" It wasn't quite a question, it was an assessment. "Just me and my horse," William said. "And Cutter doesn't gossip." Another pause, shorter this time. She stepped out from behind the post, and William finally got a look at her in the thin moonlight. She was somewhere in her late 20s, maybe 30. Dark hair pinned back, but several pieces had come loose, and she hadn't bothered to fix them, which told him she'd been moving fast, or hiding long enough that appearances had stopped mattering. Her dress was dark, practical color for someone who didn't want to be seen, but the cut of it was wrong for a ranch woman or a trail widow. The seams were too clean. The buttons were too fine. Even road dusty and slightly torn at the left hem, it was the kind of dress that came from a shop that didn't exist anywhere within 300 miles of Millhaven, Montana. Her eyes, though. That was what stopped him. She wasn't looking at him. She was looking past him, back down the road she'd come from. William had seen that look before. He'd seen it on a man named Decker who'd come through the territory 6 years ago, running from a land fraud case that had collapsed badly in Wyoming. He'd seen it on a Mexican family passing through in 1882, heading north with everything they owned in a single wagon. He'd seen it on his own face once a long time ago in circumstances he didn't revisit often. It was the look of someone who had calculated how much head start they had and found the number insufficient. "How long have you been out here?" William said. Not a question either. He was matching her register on instinct. "Since before sundown." Her eyes finally moved to him. "I didn't know whose land this was. I saw the fence line and I stopped because—" She paused, reconsidered, started again. "I needed to stop moving for a moment." "You're bleeding," William said. Her hand went immediately to her left forearm, where a dark stain had soaked through the fabric. Her jaw tightened. "I caught it on a wire fence, earlier. It's not serious." "Wire fence wounds in Montana get serious fast," William said. "I've got medical supplies at the house, clean water, food if you haven't eaten." She took one step back. I'm not looking for charity. I didn't offer it as charity, William said. I offered it as basic human sense. You're hurt, you've been out in the cold for 4 or 5 hours, and whatever you're running from, you're not going to outrun it if your arm gets infected and you can't ride. He paused. You have a horse. I had one. Something moved across her face, anger or something close to it. He threw a shoe 2 miles back. I left him at the livery at the edge of town. Peterson's livery. The man with the red beard, yes. That's Peterson. William thought about this. He's a decent man. Discreet if you paid him enough to be. I paid him enough. William studied her for another moment. She was still watching the road. Her breathing was steady, but her right hand was slightly tensed at her side, not reaching for anything but ready to. She'd made some calculation in the moment after he'd spoken about the medical supplies, and she hadn't stepped back again, which meant the calculation had come out in his favor. Barely. My name is William Cooper. I own this ranch. The house is about a 1/4 mile up that road. I'm going to ride up there, and you can either walk alongside me, or you can go back to watching the road by yourself. But I'd appreciate it if you'd at least tell me your name before you decide. The pause was longer this time. Victoria. Victoria Harrison. She said it the way people say things they've been debating whether to say all in a rush, like they've committed before they could change their mind. Miss Harrison, William said, can you walk a 1/4 mile? I can walk considerably more than that, she said with a sharpness that sounded reflexive. Then more quietly, yes, I can walk. She didn't speak during the walk up to the house, and William didn't push her. He'd learned early from his father, from 2 decades of managing men, from one marriage that hadn't survived his tendency to fill silences with demands that the worst thing you could do with a frightened person was press them before they were ready. Fear didn't respond to logic, it responded to evidence. And the only evidence he could offer right now was the simple fact of not doing anything threatening. Heimat coffee. He set out bread and cold sliced beef. He found the medical kit and set it on the table without comment. Victoria Harrison sat down and looked at everything on the table as if she was deciding whether it was a trap. The coffee's real, William said. Not the chicory kind. I have particular feelings about chicory coffee. Something in her face almost shifted into something that wasn't quite alarm. It was the ghost of an expression that might under other circumstances have been amusement. I have feelings about it too. She poured herself a cup and drank it, standing up still watching the door. The road you came from, William said. Anyone following you on it? Not yet. Not yet. He pulled out a chair across from her and sat down. That's a specific kind of answer. It's an accurate one. How much time do you think you have? She set the cup down, looked at him directly for the first time since they'd been in the light. Her eyes were dark brown, he thought, or possibly a very deep green. It was hard to tell in the lamplight, and there was an intelligence in them that was doing something active, measuring, calculating. He'd met educated men with less going on behind their eyes. Why are you asking me that? Because if you've got a week, I can point you toward the Northern Pacific Depot and get you on a train without much trouble. If you've got a day, we need a different plan. And if you've got less than that... He stopped, considered. Then we need to talk right now, and we need to talk fast. Victoria Harrison looked at him for a long moment. Why? She said quietly. Why would you do any of that? You don't know me. No, William agreed. But I know what it looks like when someone is out of road. Something shifted in her then. Not a breakdown, she was too tightly controlled for that. But some internal brace she'd been holding loosened just slightly, the way a person's shoulders drop after they've been carrying weight for a very long time, and someone finally notices. She sat down. I have, perhaps 2 days, maybe 3 if they lost my trail at Billings the way I hoped. She folded her hands on the table. And I'm not going to take a train. They'll be watching the stations. Who is they? She looked at her hands. That is a long story. I've got coffee, and I don't sleep well anyway, William said. Take your time. Her name was Victoria Eloise Harrison, and she had come from Philadelphia. Not the Philadelphia of shipyards and factory smoke, but the other Philadelphia, the one of wide tree-lined avenues and stone townhouses, and a particular kind of quiet wealth that expressed itself through understatement and never ever admitted to anything as vulgar as uncertainty. Her father, Edmund Harrison, had built that wealth over 30 years in railroad investment. Not a builder of railroads. Edmund Harrison would have considered that far too physical, too exposed to weather and machinery and men who ate their lunches with their hands. No, Edmund Harrison was a man who financed the building of railroads, which was a considerably safer position, and in the 1870s, a considerably more profitable one. She had grown up in that house. She had been educated in that house, governesses, until 16, then 2 years, at a young ladies' academy in Boston, then back to Philadelphia, to be prepared for the kind of life that her father considered appropriate for a Harrison daughter, which meant a careful marriage to a man of similar standing, and the management of a large household, and the graceful attendance of the right dinners. She had been, by her own description, reasonably compliant about most of this, until she was 24. That was when I started going through his books. William, who had been refilling her coffee without being asked, stopped. "Your father's books." Not intentionally at first. Father had been ill in the winter of 1883. Nothing life-threatening, but enough to confine him to his room for 6 weeks. He asked me to manage the household accounts during that time. Bills, staff, wages, the regular suppliers. She paused. I was good at it. Better than I expected to be, actually. Better than our solicitor, Mr. Crane, who I realized quite quickly had been double billing for minor expenses for approximately 4 years. You caught his solicitor stealing. I caught the solicitor stealing 4 years of minor expenses, which tells you something about how carefully anyone had actually looked at those books before. She picked up the coffee cup. When Father recovered, and I told him he was very pleased, he dismissed Crane, and then he said something that I've thought about many times since. You have a gift for this, Victoria. It's a pity you're a woman. William said nothing. I took that as an invitation, which was almost certainly not how he meant it. She kept going through the books. Not the household accounts anymore, she'd exhausted those. She started asking questions about the business correspondence that came to the house, and her father perhaps believing that curiosity was harmless. In a daughter who would soon be married and occupied elsewhere, answered some of them. Enough to give her threads to follow. And she followed them. What she found over the next 18 months was not the theft of small sums. It was something considerably larger and considerably more deliberate. Edmund Harrison, along with 4 other men whose names Victoria delivered to William Cooper, one by one, each name landing with a small precise weight, had been engaged since 1879 in a scheme involving fraudulent land grants connected to the Northern Pacific Railroad's western expansion. The scheme was elegant in the way that sufficiently dishonest things sometimes are. They used the legitimate cover of railroad investment to acquire rights to land parcels, then sold those rights multiple times over to different buyers, each buyer believing they had purchased an exclusive claim. The money was real. The land was real. The claims were not. How many buyers, William said. That I could document. Victoria set down her cup. 47, spread across 4 territories. The total value of the fraudulent claims was somewhere in the range of $240,000. William was quiet for a moment. That's a considerable amount of money. Yes. Her voice was perfectly flat. It is. She had made a decision, she told him. She had spent 3 months making it, arguing with herself, going back through every document she had copied and every figure she had traced, looking for the explanation that made it something other than what it was. She had not found that explanation. She had gone to a man named Arthur Gillespie, who was a federal land agent she had met twice at her father's dinners. She had presented him with what she had. Gillespie had listened carefully, thanked her, and told her he would look into the matter. 2 weeks later, her father called her into his study and told her that she had made a very serious mistake. I wasn't angry. He was very calm. He explained to me that what I had done going to a federal agent with private business documents was a form of theft. That the documents I had copied were not mine to copy. That my interpretation of those documents was incorrect, and that Mr. Gillespie, who was apparently a friend of the family in ways I hadn't known, had found them deeply concerning, not about my father, but about me. She paused. He told me that there were people who believed I had fabricated the documents myself, as part of an attempt to... She stopped. Something moved across her face. There was a man father had been encouraging me to consider. A very wealthy man, considerably older than me, who had expressed interest in a formal arrangement. I had made my feelings about that arrangement clear. Father suggested that the accusation of document forgery might be connected in certain people's minds to that rejection. He suggested his friends would say you made it up because you wanted out of an unwanted engagement. William said. In somewhat more elaborate language, yes. Victoria looked at the table. He also told me that he loved me very much, and that if I stayed home, kept quiet, and agreed to the arrangement, the whole matter would be forgotten, and we would never speak of it again. And if I didn't. Mr. Gillespie had already drafted a formal complaint alleging that Victoria Harrison had stolen financial documents from her father's study and used them to fabricate evidence of crimes that did not exist as part of a scheme to, I believe the word he used was, destabilize her father's business relationships for personal gain. William sat back. So they were going to charge you, he said slowly, for reporting what they did. They were going to charge me for the copies of the evidence that proved what they did, she said. Yes. The fire popped. Neither of them moved. What did you do? William said. I went upstairs, Victoria said. I packed one bag. I took the copies of the documents that I had kept in a place my father didn't know about. I left the house at 3 a.m, and I have been moving west ever since. How long ago? 8 months. 8 months. He did the math. 8 months of moving, of rented rooms, of watching roads, of that particular coiled stillness she'd had behind the fence post. 8 months of being 24, 25 now, he calculated, and carrying $240,000 worth of evidence of federal land fraud in whatever bag she'd packed in the dark. Where are the documents now? She looked at him. You've known me for approximately 2 hours. That's fair, William said immediately. Forget I asked. She looked at him for another moment. Then something in her expression shifted. Not quite trust, not yet, but something that was considering the possibility. They're safe. That's all I'll say. That's enough. William stood up. He went to the window and looked out at the dark. The road was empty. You need sleep. There's a room at the end of the hall. It was my foreman's until he married and moved out, and it locks from the inside. I'll put your bag outside the door. In the morning we can talk about what comes next. I'm not, she started. Miss Harrison. He turned to look at her. You've been awake for what looks like at least 20 hours. You're injured. You're running on coffee and willpower. And whatever happens next, it's going to require you to think clearly, and you cannot think clearly when you're this exhausted. He picked up the lamp nearest the door. I gave you my name and you gave me yours. That's sufficient trust for a borrowed bed. The rest can wait until morning. She was quiet. The fire crackled. Outside, somewhere distant, a coyote called once and went silent. All right, Victoria said, very quietly. He didn't sleep. He sat in the chair by the front window with his rifle across his lap and his coffee going cold beside him. And he thought about what she'd told him, turning it over, the way you'd turn a stone, to see what lived under it. The scheme she'd described was not a small crime. It was not the kind of thing that got sorted out quietly with a stern letter from a federal judge. $240,000 in fraudulent land claims across 4 territories meant lawyers and congressmen and men who owned newspapers, and therefore owned, to a meaningful degree, what people believed to be true. It meant a father who had decided his daughter's silence was worth more than his daughter's trust. It meant a federal land agent who was already in someone's pocket. And it meant William's jaw tightened, that whoever was following her had resources. Real resources. The kind that could chase a woman for 8 months across half a continent. He thought about the way she'd said it 2 days. Maybe 3 if they lost my trail at Billings the way I hoped. She hadn't hoped. She'd calculated. There was a difference and she knew it. He thought about her father's books. A young woman of 24 handed the household accounts as a temporary measure, finding the small theft first, then following the thread because she was good at it and nobody expected her to be, and arriving at the end of the thread to find her own father standing there. He thought about what that moment must have felt like. He thought about his own father, who had been a simpler and less wealthy man, and who had done a simpler and less elaborate version of a very similar thing. And William had been 16 when he found out, and had dealt with it by leaving, which was, he acknowledged to the dark window, not entirely unlike what Victoria Harrison had done. Except she'd taken the evidence with her, which he thought meant she wasn't just running. She was waiting. She came out of the room at 7 in the morning, and William had expected her to look worse, exhausted and disoriented the way people do after the first real sleep in a long time. Instead, she looked precisely contained, like a person who had made her decisions in the night and arrived at breakfast with them already settled. "Sit down," William said. "Eggs are almost ready." "You didn't need to. I was making them anyway. I eat eggs every morning. It's not a particular effort." She sat down. He watched her clock the positions in the room, the door, the windows, the back exit through the kitchen, the same way she'd clocked the road the night before. It was so automatic, she probably didn't know she was doing it. The road was empty all night. I sat up and watched it. Her eyes came to him sharply. She stopped. "You stayed up." "I've gone longer without sleep." He put the eggs on the table. "I wanted to know if anyone was coming. And if they had been, then I'd have woken you up and we'd have dealt with it." He sat down. "We're in Montana, Miss Harrison. People don't just ride onto a man's property without consequences. There are laws here, same as anywhere else, and the men who enforce them are somewhat less purchasable than the ones you've been dealing with. I wouldn't count on that, quietly but firmly. Money reaches further than people want to believe." "Maybe," William said, "but it reaches slower in places where it's harder to spend." He looked at her. "What do you need? Not what you're willing to ask for. What do you actually need?" Victoria Harrison looked at her eggs. "Time. And somewhere they won't think to look. They'll look in town eventually." "I know. So don't be in town." He said it simply. "You can stay here. Not forever. I'm not asking you to settle on my ranch. But long enough to figure out the next step." He paused. "I've got 6 ranch hands and a cook. None of them are inclined toward gossip, and all of them are inclined toward minding their own business, which in my experience is rarer and more valuable than most people think." Victoria looked up at him. "Why?" It was the same word she'd used the night before, but the tone had changed, less wary, more genuinely uncertain. "You don't owe me anything. You don't know me. I could be—" She stopped. "I could be exactly what they say I am." "Could you?" William said. "Yes." "Are you?" A pause. Very long. "No." "Then I'm not worried about it." He picked up his fork. "Eat your eggs, Miss Harrison. They're better hot." He showed her around the ranch that first morning, and he did it not because he thought she needed the tour, but because he thought she needed to move to be doing something purposeful, rather than sitting in a room watching the door. She walked beside him with her arms slightly raised, a habit he was beginning to realize of someone who spent a lot of time in rough terrain and had learned to balance without thinking about it, and she asked questions. Not the questions most visitors asked. "Is that cattle or horses? How many acres is the water good?" She asked about the contracts. "You said you own this land outright," she said, looking at the fence line on the south pasture. "My father's grant originally," William said. "I've expanded twice since then. Purchased outright both times." "From whom?" "First purchase from a man named Abelard, who was moving to California. Second purchase." He stopped. "From a land agent. Man named Colby. Office up in Helena." Victoria's walking slowed almost imperceptibly. "When was the second purchase?" 1881. "And you have the deed?" "I have the deed," William said with a slight edge. "I'm not an idiot, Miss Harrison. I know what a deed is, and I know where mine is. I'm not suggesting you're an idiot." She turned to face him. There was something different in her expression now, not the wariness or the calculation or the ghost of amusement. This was focus. Pure, clean, professional focus. I'm asking because I know the name Colby. He had an office in Helena and a satellite arrangement with a firm in Billings. He also had a relationship with the Northern Pacific land acquisition process that was— She paused. Irregular. William looked at her. My deed is valid. It came out with less certainty than he intended. Bring it to me. I'll tell you. The deed was valid. She went through it for 45 minutes with the focused efficiency of someone who had spent 18 months reading fraudulent land documents and knew exactly what to look for. She checked the grant number against a reference list that she pulled from her memory without apparent effort. She checked the survey description. She checked the date of transfer and the notarization and the chain of title going back to the original territorial grant. You're clean, she said finally. She set the document down. Whoever Colby was dealing with this transaction was legitimate. William let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. Well, you had reason to be concerned, she said not unkindly. He was a legitimate agent for some transactions and a fraudulent one for others. It depended on who was paying him for what. And you know this from your father's documents. From my father's documents, and from a series of letters I found in a separate file that I believe were intended to be destroyed but weren't. She picked up the deed and handed it back to him. The amount of paper that powerful men generate in the commission of their crimes and then fail to properly destroy is honestly remarkable. William took the deed. He looked at her. You need somewhere to work. She blinked. It was the first genuinely unguarded expression he'd seen from her. What? You have documents. You have information. You've been carrying this thing for 8 months, and presumably you've been doing something with it beyond just running. He set the deed on the desk. You need a table, decent light, time without someone banging on the door. I have all 3. Victoria Harrison looked at him with an expression that was doing several things at once and not quite resolving into any of them. You're offering me workspace, she said slowly. I'm offering you a table by a window and the reasonable certainty that nobody is going to come through my gate in the next few days without me knowing about it first. He paused. I'm not offering to involve myself in your situation. That's yours. But a problem worked on in good conditions is more solvable than the same problem worked on under a fence post in the dark. Something moved across her face. Something she wasn't entirely prepared for. Thank you. It came out slightly rough, like the words had taken more getting out than she'd expected. Don't thank me yet, William said. My office table is not particularly comfortable, and I drink a lot of coffee, and I may ask you questions occasionally that you're not required to answer. He moved toward the door. But I'll ask them honestly, and that's more than some people can say. He left her there with the deed still in her hand, standing in the morning light, and he thought not for the last time that week that whatever Victoria Harrison was hiding from it was very clearly not herself, that he thought was already more than he could say about most people he knew. And it was considerably more than he had expected to find at his own gate at 9:30 on a Tuesday night in the middle of a drought. The documents she had were safe, she'd said, but the people she was hiding from were getting closer. And William Cooper, who had spent 20 years believing that solitude was the most defensible position a man could hold, felt something he hadn't felt in a long time, the specific, inconvenient, and entirely unwelcome sensation of caring what happened next. And it was considerably more than he had expected to find at his own gate at 9:30 on a Tuesday night in the middle of a drought, and now 3 days later sitting across the breakfast table from Victoria Harrison, while she read through a stack of documents she'd finally retrieved from wherever she'd been keeping them. William Cooper had the distinct and unsettling feeling that his life had rearranged itself around a stranger without asking his permission first. He didn't entirely mind. That was the part that bothered him. She'd brought the documents out on the morning of the 3rd day. Not all of them, he understood that instinctively. The way he understood that she was still measuring him, still running her internal calculations, still not entirely sure what column of her ledger he belonged in. But enough. A leather portfolio worn soft at the corners from handling containing perhaps 60 pages of copied correspondence and financial records arranged in an order that was clearly not accidental. She set it on the office table without ceremony. I want to show you something. Not because I need your help, because I need someone who knows this territory to tell me if I'm reading it correctly. William pulled his chair around to her side of the table. Close enough to see the documents, but not close enough to crowd her. He'd learned that about her already. She had a precise radius of comfort, and crossing it without invitation produced a stillness in her that was different from her usual stillness. Tighter. Prepared. She laid 3 pages side by side. These are letters. Between my father's primary associate, a man named Harlan Voss, and a land broker operating out of Billings. The letters are dated between March and September of 1882. They reference a series of land transactions in what is described as the Northern Corridor. I believe that means the strip of territory running from Billings northeast along the route of the planned rail extension. William looked at these pages. The handwriting was fine and precise on one side, Voss presumably, and rougher, more hurried on the other. That's this county. Northern Corridor, if they mean what I think they mean, that's within 40 miles of here. Yes. Victoria's finger moved to a figure in the second letter. This number. Do you recognize the format? He looked. It was a parcel identifier, a string of numbers and letters that corresponded to the territorial survey system used to catalog land grants before purchase. He did recognize it. His stomach dropped about 3 inches. That's a double C parcel number. Not his parcel, the format was similar, but the sequence was wrong for his own deed. But the prefix was the same county designation. That's someone's land in this county. 3 someones, Victoria said quietly. She turned to the 3rd page. There are 3 parcel identifiers in these letters. Each one appears in at least 2 separate purchase agreements. I have copies of both agreements for each parcel, which means each of these 3 pieces of land was sold twice, to different buyers. Neither buyer knew about the other. William sat back. In this county. The fire popped. Neither of them moved. Do you know whose parcels they are? William said. Not yet. That's what I need. Someone who knows this land and knows who owns what. She looked at him steadily. I wasn't going to ask you. I was going to find the county records office in town and see what I could find. But you clearly already know the survey format, which means... I know every parcel in this county, William said. Or close enough. He stood up. He walked to the window. He stood there for a moment. Give me the numbers. She read them to him from memory, not from the page, which told him she'd been carrying them in her head for a while. He knew 2 of them immediately. The 3rd took him a moment longer, and when it came to him, he felt a specific cold settling in his chest. The first 2 are ranches north of the Clearwater. Hendrick's family, and a man named Brower, who came up from Wyoming in '79. Good men, both of them. He paused. The 3rd one is the water rights parcel on Elk Creek. Victoria went very still. Water rights. The only reliable year-round water source for about a 12-mile stretch of grazing land to the east. William turned around. If someone owns that parcel, the real owner, whoever actually has the valid claim, they control whether 6 or 7 ranches in this county can water their cattle in a dry year. Victoria's hands, flat on the table, pressed down slightly. And if 2 people believe they own it, she said slowly, then someone is going to find out they don't, William said. And it's going to be ugly when they do. She was quiet for a moment. Then, how dry does it get here? Dry enough, William said. This summer's already running short. If it doesn't rain by August, that creek is going to matter more than it usually does. Victoria looked at the letters on the table. Then they're not just waiting for a payout, mostly to herself. They're waiting for the right moment, when the land is worth the most, when people are desperate enough to fight over it, instead of looking too closely at how the claims were made. William stared at her. That's exactly right. And then, because he had spent 20 years in business and knew the shape of a careful plan when he saw one laid out, how long have you known that? I suspected it in February. I was fairly certain by April. I couldn't prove the timing until I saw the correspondence about the rail extension route. She picked up the third letter. This one references a meeting scheduled for. She checked the third week of August. It says, and I'm quoting directly, "By that date the leverage will be sufficient." I didn't know what the leverage was until you just told me about the water. August. 3 months away. They're going to let the summer get bad, William said. Let the ranchers get worried about the water, then surface the competing claim on the creek parcel, create a legal dispute. While everybody's lawyers are fighting over the deed, the real owners of the scheme step in and offer to mediate for a price, or offer to purchase the contested parcel outright, Victoria said, from whoever is willing to accept the quickest settlement. Once they have the deed legitimately, or what appears to be legitimately, the previous fraudulent transactions become harder to prove. The paper trail gets muddier. They clean it by making it complicated, William said. Yes. He looked at her. You've been working this out for 8 months. I've had time to think. Something in her voice was dry, but not bitter. Barely. And you came here to Montana specifically because of the letters. Because this is where the next move is. Victoria looked at the table. Partly. I also came here because it was the farthest I could get from Philadelphia with the money I had left and still feel like I was doing something useful rather than just running. She paused, very briefly. But yes, mostly because of the letters. William sat down again. Who else knows what you know? Nobody. That I'm certain of. The federal agent, Gillespie. Gillespie knows I went to him. He doesn't know how much I actually had. I was careful about that. A pause. I showed him enough to be taken seriously and kept enough back to be useful if I needed it later. At the time, I thought I was being clever. Something moved across her face. In retrospect, I was being exactly clever enough to make myself a serious problem without being clever enough to actually solve it. You were 24, William said. That's not an excuse. It's not an excuse, William agreed. It's a fact. 24 and reading your father's business correspondence and finding a federal crime. Most people that age wouldn't have gotten as far as you did before they ran. Victoria was quiet. I shouldn't have run. It came out flat and hard, like something she'd said to herself many times in many empty rooms. I should have found a lawyer before I went to Gillespie. I should have made copies of the copies and put them somewhere before I took the originals to anyone. I should have... She stopped, breathed. It doesn't matter now what I should have done. No, William said. It doesn't. What matters now is what comes next. She looked up at him. What comes next? Is that I find a way to get these documents to someone who can actually use them. Not a federal land agent, a federal prosecutor, someone who doesn't know my father and hasn't already been paid to not know him. She paused. That person exists. I believe that. But finding them from inside a situation where the people looking for me have resources and connections, and I have... She looked around the office. A borrowed table. You have more than that, William said. She waited. You have a rancher who knows every parcel in this county, William said. Who knows the men on those parcels, and knows the water situation, and knows the land agent network because he's dealt with it for 20 years. He let that sit for a moment. And who has, as it happens, a particular and personal dislike for people who use complicated paper to steal from people who work hard. Victoria looked at him for a long time. That's the second time you've offered me something, she said carefully. Without being asked, without knowing me. I told you I'd ask honest questions, William said. Here's one, do you want help or don't you? She was quiet for a long time. I want help. As if the words cost something. I'm not used to asking for it. That makes 2 of us, William said. We'll figure it out as we go. What neither of them anticipated was how quickly as we go would arrive. It came in the form of a rider at the front gate 2 mornings later. Not the slow, familiar approach of a neighbor or a delivery, but the fast, deliberate trot of someone who knew exactly where they were going and had been watching for the right moment to approach. William was in the barn when one of his hands, a quiet young man named Teller, appeared in the doorway. Man at the gate asking for you, Teller said. Doesn't look like local. William set down what he was doing. What does he look like? City, Teller said. Good coat. Hired horse not his own, you can tell by the way he sits it. A pause. He asked if you'd had any new hands or visitors recently. The question landed like a stone in still water. What did you tell him? William said. Told him I'd been busy with the south pasture fence and hadn't paid attention to much else. Teller's face was entirely neutral. Didn't seem like the kind of question that needed a full answer. William looked at him for a moment. Teller had been with him for 4 years. He was 22 and economical with words, and had the particular Montana quality of minding his own business so thoroughly that he had become over time almost invisible in the best possible way. Good man, William said. Go back to the south pasture. Don't hurry. He walked to the house first. Victoria was at the office table. She'd been there since 6 in the morning, and she looked up when he came through the door. She read his face before he said anything. She was on her feet before he'd closed the door behind him. Someone's at the gate, he said low and quick. City man hired horse. He asked about visitors. The color didn't drain from her face. She was too controlled for that, but something happened to her eyes. A sharpening. An assessment running so fast it was almost visible. How far is the gate from here? 1/4 mile. He can't see the house from there. The documents. She was already moving toward the office table. Leave them, William said. Right where they are. If you move them, and he comes in here, an empty table is more suspicious than a working one. He looked at her. Can you look like a ranch hand? She stopped. Excuse me? I have a spare set of work clothes in the chest at the top of the stairs. They'll be large on you, but that doesn't matter. Hair back and under a hat. You stay in the barn east side away from the door, and you do not come out until I come get you. Victoria Harrison looked at him with an expression that was rapid and complicated. You think he's here for me specifically? I think he asked about visitors, William said. On a working ranch, where visitors are none of his business unless he has a specific reason to want to know. He held her gaze. How often are you wrong about danger? A pause, very short. Not often. Then go, William said. Now. She went. The man at the gate was named Aldous Prentice, and he had the kind of polished surface that William Cooper had learned over 20 years of business dealings to distrust on sight. Not because polished men were always dishonest, but because a man who maintained that level of finish while riding a hired horse down a Montana ranch road in the early morning had made a particular kind of effort that required a particular kind of motivation. Mr. Cooper. The handshake was firm and practiced. I hope I'm not intruding on your morning. Not particularly, William said. He didn't invite Prentice through the gate. They stood on the roadside, which was technically neutral ground, and William kept his posture easy and his eyes steady and gave nothing away. What can I do for you? I'm with a legal firm representing interests back east, Prentice said. Baxter Crane and Associates. He produced a card. Clean white card, good printing. We've been engaged to locate a young woman named Victoria Harrison, who we understand may have passed through this area recently. Her family is very concerned. Is that right? William said. She left home under some distress, Prentice continued. Mental distress, I should say. She had a rather difficult episode earlier in the year, made some troubling accusations against her family, which were, as these things often are, the product of a disturbed state of mind, rather than any basis in reality. Her father is desperate to find her and get her proper care. William looked at this card. Baxter Crane and Associates, Philadelphia address. He thought about a name. Victoria had mentioned Crane, the solicitor her father had dismissed for double billing. And now here was a Crane on the letterhead of the firm sent to find her. The world, William thought, was a small and consistent place when it wanted to be. Can't say I've seen a woman matching that description, William said. What does she look like? Prentice described her with a precision that confirmed he had a very good source of information. Height, hair color, approximate age, the particular way she carried herself. He almost certainly had a photograph. Men like Prentice usually did. I'll keep an eye out, William said. If I see someone, who should I contact? You can send word to my hotel in town, Prentice said. I'll be there for the next several days. He looked past William toward the ranch. You run a large operation here. Large enough, William said. Many hands, enough to run it. Any newcomers recently itinerant workers do pass through, I understand, this time of year. William met his eyes. My hiring is my business. Pleasantly. The pleasance was load-bearing. Is there anything else I can help you with, Mr. Prentice? There was a pause. Prentice was recalibrating. William could see it, the slight adjustment behind the man's polished expression. No, Prentice said finally. I appreciate your time, Mr. Cooper, and if you do happen to see her, the family would be very grateful indeed. He let that land with its full weight. Men in your position always benefit from goodwill in the right circles. Men in my position built their ranches, William said, without goodwill from any circles in particular. He tipped his hat. Good morning, Mr. Prentice. He watched the man ride back toward the main road before he moved. Chaka. Victoria was in the east corner of the barn. She'd found herself something to do with her hands. She was mending a piece of tack with the focused competence of someone who had figured out during 8 months of moving that idle hands in tense situations were an enemy. She looked up when William came in. He told her quickly. The firm's name, the description. Prentice had given the offer of gratitude from the right circles. She listened without interrupting. Her hands never stopped working on the tack. Baxter Crane, she said when he finished. Crane is my father's former solicitor. I know, you mentioned him. How was dismissed? Publicly, with considerable embarrassment. She looked at the leather in her hands. Which means my father took him back privately, and the price of taking him back was using him for exactly this. She paused. Crane knows me. He knows how I think. He's the one who would have advised them on how to track me. Then he's good at it, William said. Because Prentice knew what you looked like in considerable detail. He'll have a photograph. She set down the tack. I had my photograph taken 3 times in the year before I left. 2 of the photographs went to my father's study. She stood up. Mr. Cooper. William. He'd said it twice before. She kept reverting. William. The name sat differently in her mouth each time, like she was still deciding how much to trust it. He's going to show that photograph in town. He's going to ask at the hotel, at the general store, at the livery where I left my horse. She looked at him steadily. Peterson at the livery knows I was heading this direction. Peterson is a discreet man. Peterson is a discreet man who has no particular reason to protect a woman he met once, Victoria said. And Prentice will offer him money. Probably a substantial amount relative to what Peterson earns in a month. She paused. How long before Prentice comes back here with more certainty? William thought about it. A day. Maybe 2 if Peterson holds. He looked at her. And if he comes back with more certainty, he won't come alone. No, Victoria agreed. He won't. They looked at each other across the barn. Outside somewhere, Teller was working on the south pasture fence with the slow, deliberate patience of a man who had been told not to hurry and intended to follow instructions thoroughly. We need to move faster, Victoria said. Yes, William said. The water rights parcel. She said it like she'd been thinking about it since the night before and was only now saying it out loud. If the fraudulent claims on those 3 parcels are what Voss and my father are planning to use, that's their leverage here. If we could demonstrate the fraud on those specific parcels to someone with standing to act on it before August. Before the meeting, William said. Before the meeting, she confirmed. It removes the leverage before they can use it. It doesn't fix everything. It doesn't resolve the full scheme, doesn't clear my name entirely, but it protects the ranchers in this county. And it creates a public record that's much harder to suppress than correspondence that only I have seen. She looked at him. Do you know a judge? I know 2 judges, William said. One of them I'd trust. The other one I wouldn't trust with my horse. Which one? Judge Alderman, William said. He's been on the district bench for 12 years. He's from Ohio originally, which means he has no family connections in this territory and nobody to owe favors to. He paused. He's also a difficult man who doesn't like to be approached without sufficient cause. I have sufficient cause, Victoria said. I have 60 pages of it. You have 60 pages of copied correspondence. William said not to argue, but to prepare her. The defense will say the copies are fabricated. That's what they already say. I know. Victoria picked up the piece of tack again, not because she needed to work on it, he thought, but because it gave her hands something to do while her mind ran. But I also have the parcel identifiers, the survey numbers. Those can be cross-referenced against the county records, the real county records, and if both purchase agreements appear in the records, that's not something anyone can claim I fabricated. That's the county's own paperwork. William stared at her. You want to pull the county deed records for those 3 parcels? I want someone to pull them. Someone who has standing to request them without raising suspicion. Someone who knows the county clerk. She looked at him with that steady, measuring look. Do you know the county clerk? I've known Martin Fowler since 1878, William said. Would he pull deed records for you without asking why? He'd ask why, William said. But he'd also believe me if I gave him a reasonable answer. He thought about it. I've been a reliable customer of the county records office for 20 years. I could tell him I'm doing due diligence on potential parcels, and he'd believe it. Victoria's hands stilled. If the county records show 2 deeds on the same parcel, she said slowly, and my copied correspondence connects those deeds to the same network, then you have something that doesn't depend on whether anyone believes you about your father, William said. A pause. Very quiet. Yes. Exactly. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Outside a hawk called once sharp and high. William heard one of his other hands crossing the yard, whistling something tuneless. There's a problem, Victoria said. There's usually one. If Prentice is in town and showing my photograph around, I can't go to the county records office myself. And if you go to pull 3 specific deed records the same week, a man from Philadelphia is asking about me, and Prentice is as thorough as I think he is. She stopped. He'll hear about it. He'll know someone is looking at those parcels, and he'll move faster. So we have to move faster than that, William said. How? William thought. Fowler takes lunch at 12:30, he said. At the diner on 2nd Street. He's there for 45 minutes every day without exception, because he's been doing it for 15 years, and he believes in the value of routine. He paused. His office is locked when he's at lunch, but I have a key. Victoria looked at him. You have a key to the county clerk's office. He gave it to me in 1883 when he had surgery and needed someone to water his records room during his recovery, William said. He asked for it back later. I gave him back a key. A beat. I don't know with complete certainty that it was the specific key he gave me. Victoria stared at him for a moment. Then carefully, briefly, and in a way that she clearly hadn't entirely intended, she laughed. Not a long laugh. More like the escape valve releasing a small amount of pressure. But it was real and unguarded, and it was the first time William had seen her face without anything strategic in it. It was, he thought, a remarkable difference. You've had that key for 3 years. It seemed wasteful to get rid of it, William said. That is, collecting herself genuinely useful information. She looked at him. How thorough are the county deed records? Thorough enough, William said. Fowler is a precise man. Every transfer, every survey update, every competing claim gets logged. He paused. If there are 2 deeds on record for the same parcel, and if the acquisition dates match what you have in those letters, it'll be right there. Then we have a window, Victoria said. Noon to 1:15. Today, if we move now, before Prentice has time to build enough certainty to come back here with company. Today, William said. The longer we wait. I know. I'm not disagreeing. I'm thinking about whether you stay here or come with me. I come with you, she said immediately. I know what I'm looking for. You don't. Even if you pull every record in that room, you won't know what matters until I tell you. Prentice has your photograph. Prentice is having his noon meal somewhere in this town. Or he's at the hotel. Or he's asking questions at the livery. He can't be everywhere at once. She met his eyes. Men like Prentice work in a straight line. They identify a target, they pursue it, they apply pressure. They don't expect the target to be walking into county records offices in the middle of the day. Because most targets aren't, William said. No, Victoria agreed. They're not. He looked at her for a long moment. The work clothes she'd changed into his old flannel shirt, a pair of canvas trousers she'd belted tight with a piece of cord were large enough to change her silhouette considerably. Her hair was still back and under his spare hat. From a distance in motion, she could pass for a young ranch hand easily enough. Stay close. Don't look at anyone directly. If someone speaks to you, don't answer. I'll handle the talking. Understood. And if we see Prentice, we don't run. Running is what he's waiting for. She straightened, squared her shoulders. We walk. William looked at her standing in the middle of his barn, in oversized ranch clothes, with $240,000 of documentary evidence of federal fraud in her head, and a precision about her that had absolutely nothing to do with the situation she'd survived, and everything to do with who she'd been before it broke over her. I thought about what she'd said the night before. I should have found a lawyer first. I should have been smarter. She didn't need a lawyer, he thought. She was a lawyer. She just hadn't had the piece of paper that would have made anyone take her seriously before she walked into that room. Ready. Victoria Harrison picked up her hat and pulled it down low over her forehead. I've been ready for 8 months. I've been ready for 8 months, Victoria said, and the truth of it hit William Cooper somewhere below the ribs, because he understood now that ready wasn't the same as safe, and safe wasn't something either of them could afford to wait for. They rode into Millhaven at 11:45. William set the pace, not hurried, not slow. The pace of a rancher running an ordinary errand on an ordinary Tuesday, which was exactly what he intended anyone watching to see. Victoria rode half a length behind him on his second horse hat, pulled low posture, easy in the way she'd adapted to remarkably fast for a woman who had grown up in Philadelphia drawing rooms. Whatever else the last 8 months had done to her, they'd taught her to move through unfamiliar territory without broadcasting that she was doing it. William kept his eyes moving without letting them appear to move. It was a skill he'd developed over years of reading cattle auctions, seeing everything without making anything feel like scrutiny. He clocked the hotel on the right side of Main Street, the curtains closed on the second floor. He clocked the livery at the end of the block. Peterson visible in the doorway talking to someone. He clocked the diner on 2nd Street, which was already filling up with the noon crowd voices and the smell of coffee and cooked meat spilling out onto the road. No sign of Prentice. He pulled up at the side alley that ran behind the county records office and dismounted without making a production of it. Fowler left for lunch 4 minutes ago, he said quietly, not looking at her. I watched him cross 2nd Street from the ridge as we came in. How can you possibly know his routine that precisely? Victoria said. I told you. 15 years, same table, same time. He tied his horse to the post. I've had occasion to need documents on short notice more than once. A man learns these things. He unlocked the back door with the key that may or may not have been the original, and they were inside before anyone on the main street had a reason to look twice. The county records office was a single large room, lined with wooden filing cabinets and smelling of paper and dust and the particular dryness of important things preserved past their moment of urgency. Fowler kept it meticulously organized in a system that was partly standard territorial practice and partly personal invention, and William had learned enough of it over the years to navigate without fumbling. Victoria was already at the first cabinet before he'd locked the door behind them. Survey parcels, she said. Northern Corridor designation. The prefix was NC7. That bank of cabinets on the left, William said. Second drawer from the bottom. Fowler files active parcels at the bottom, historical at the top. She went to it. Her hands were quick and certain, moving through the folders with the efficiency of someone who had spent a great deal of time doing exactly this kind of search in exactly this kind of circumstance. William stood near the front window, angled so he could see a slice of the street without being visible from it. First parcel, she said, not loud, almost to herself. Then, there. A pause. William. He crossed the room. She had 2 folders open on the counter beside the cabinet. Her finger was on a date in the second folder. He looked, read, looked again. The same parcel identifier. Two separate deed transfers. The first dated March 14, 1882. The second dated July 3, 1882. 3.5 months apart. Two different buyers, two different notarizing agents, but the same land. Exactly the same survey description. Down to the last decimal point of the boundary coordinates. "That's it," he said. "That's one," she said. She was already pulling the next folder. The second parcel took her less than 2 minutes. Same pattern, two transfers, different dates, different buyers. The dates matched within 3 weeks of the dates in the letters she had back at his ranch. The third parcel, the water rights parcel on Elk Creek, she didn't find immediately, and William felt the first thread of genuine urgency pull tight in his chest. He checked the street, still clear. But Fowler would be back in 25 minutes, and Fowler was not a man who ran late. It might be filed under the creek designation rather than the survey number, William said. Elk Creek water rights had a separate filing in 1880 when there was a dispute over the eastern boundary. Victoria moved to the next cabinet without a word. Third drawer. She ran her fingers along the folder tabs with a speed that was almost alarming. She stopped. She pulled the folder, opened it, and this time she didn't say anything at all for a moment. Just stood there reading, and William watched her face, and what he saw there was not triumph. It was something harder and more complicated, the expression of someone who has been hoping they were right about something terrible and has just been proven correct and finds that being right doesn't feel the way they thought it would. Two transfers, she said quietly. First one in April 1882, second in June of the same year. She turned to look at him. The second buyer is listed as a holding company called Continental Western Land Associates. William knew that name. He had to think for a moment to place it, but it came a conversation at a land auction in Helena 2 years prior, a man mentioning the company in passing as a new Eastern concern that had been picking up parcels quietly across 3 territories. Continental Western, he said. They're the ones who've been buying up grazing rights north of the Clearwater. They're also, Victoria said, listed in my father's correspondence as the holding company through which Harlan Voss processed the fraudulent acquisitions. She closed the folder, held it. Her jaw was set. Continental Western Land Associates is the clean face, the legitimate-looking front through which the dirty transactions were laundered. She looked at him. And they own what appears to be a valid deed to the Elk Creek water rights. Appears to be, William said. Because there's a prior valid deed in this folder, she said. Filed by a man named Samuel Greer in 1880 and never legally transferred. She set the folder down. Her hand pressed flat against it. Samuel Greer still owns Elk Creek. He just doesn't know yet that someone else also thinks they do. Does Greer know any of this? William said. How would he? The second deed was filed with a different notary in a different county and never challenged because nobody knew to challenge it. She straightened. Until now. William looked at the clock on the wall. 14 minutes before Fowler returned. We need copies, Victoria said. Not the originals. I won't take the originals, that's the mistake I made before, but copies witnessed with the date and the office seal. She looked at him. Can you witness a document copy? I'm a landowner of record in this county, William said. That's sufficient for a notarized copy. Fowler has a stamp. Fowler's not here. No, William said. But his stamp is. Victoria stared at him. Using a county official's seal without authorization, she said slowly, is technically a minor irregularity, William said, compared to $240,000 in fraudulent land transfers across 4 territories. He was already moving to Fowler's desk. And I will deal with Fowler directly afterward. He's a reasonable man when presented with sufficient cause. He found the stamp. He found paper. He wrote the copies himself quickly and precisely because his handwriting was clear and his memory for details was reliable. And he was, after all, a man who had spent 20 years managing contracts and knew what made a document legally legible. Victoria read each one as he finished it and corrected 2 small errors of phrasing without comment. The copies took 11 minutes. 2 minutes left. They were out the back door and in the alley with 60 seconds to spare, and William had just relocked the door and turned around when he heard from the front of the building the particular sound of a man who has completed his routine lunch with the efficiency of someone who has been completing the same routine for 15 years. Neither of them breathed. Fowler's footsteps on the front porch, the jingle of his key, the front door opening, and then nothing. Just the ordinary sounds of a man settling back to work. Victoria let out a breath. "You cut things close." "I've been told that before," William said. They made it back to the horses without incident, and they were out of the alley and moving toward the edge of town before William let himself acknowledge how tightly he'd been holding his jaw for the last 20 minutes. He was so focused on the road ahead that he almost missed it. Almost. Prentice was coming out of the hotel on the far side of Main Street as they passed the intersection. He was moving with purpose, not a man finishing his lunch, a man who had just received information and was acting on it. He had a companion now, someone William hadn't seen before. Broad-shouldered and plainly dressed in the way that men who are hired for physical persuasion rather than social polish tend to dress. Prentice didn't look their direction immediately. William kept riding. Same pace, same posture. He said nothing. Beside him, Victoria was absolutely still in the saddle. She had seen them. He knew she had seen them because she had the awareness of someone who tracked threats as automatically as other people tracked the weather. And Prentice was the kind of threat that registered at 30 yards without effort. But she didn't change her pace, didn't look, didn't tighten her hands on the reins in any way that would read as alarm from a distance. They passed the intersection. They kept riding. William counted to 10 before he spoke. "Don't look back," he said low. "I know. He didn't see your face. I know that too." "His companion," William said. "I haven't seen him in this county before." "He's not from this county," Victoria said. Her voice was steady, but she was riding slightly forward now, weight shifting the way a person does when the back of their neck is prickling. "He came with Prentice from Billings. Or further, he's not here to ask questions." "No," William agreed. They cleared the edge of town and took the road north. William resisted the urge to push to a gallop. A gallop would be visible for half a mile and would tell anyone watching exactly what they needed to know. Instead, he held to the same controlled trot, and he thought. And beside him, Victoria was also thinking, and the air between them was taut with it. He went to Peterson. Not a question. Has to be. Peterson's the only one who knew which direction you were heading. William kept his eyes on the road. "I told you Peterson was a discreet man. And I told you discretion has a price." She paused. "Don't blame Peterson. Prentice would have offered him more money than he sees in a month, possibly 2 months. Peterson has a family." The gentleness in that surprised him. She was being chased by men sent by her own father. She was carrying the strain of 8 months of running, and her first instinct was to excuse the man who had just given her away. He filed that away. "They know where I've been staying. Or they will within the hour if Prentice goes back to your gate." "Yes. Which means we have one window to do what we need to do before he arrives with enough certainty to push harder." She looked at him. "The copies we made. They need to be in a judge's hands before tonight. Alderman won't be easy to access on short notice." "Is there another way to reach him?" "His clerk," William said. "Young man named Hobbs. He's been with Alderman for 6 years, and he has the judge's ear. If I go to Hobbs with sufficient cause, Hobbs will put it in front of Alderman tonight." He paused. "But Hobbs is careful. He'll want more than copies of correspondence and deed records." "What will he want?" William thought about it. "Witnesses. People with standing in this county who can attest to the parcel ownership disputes. Who can say in front of a judge that they were sold a piece of land that someone else already held a prior claim to?" He looked at her. "The Hendricks family. And Brower." Victoria was quiet for a moment. "The men who hold the fraudulent second deeds. You want to bring them in. If they didn't know they bought a fraudulent claim, and I'd bet my ranch they didn't, then they're victims, same as Greer is a victim. And victims with standing in this county appearing before a district judge with documented evidence is a different case than a woman with copied correspondence." He looked at her steadily. You've been trying to fight this alone. You don't have to. Something moved across her face. Not softening, she didn't soften easily. He was beginning to understand, and he was beginning to understand why. But something that wasn't the calculated assessment. Something that was responding to something other than strategy. You don't know those men. You don't know if they'll cooperate. I know Hendricks, William said. He's been ranching this county for 16 years. He's a stubborn man and a proud one, and if someone sold him a piece of land with a prior claim on it, he's going to want justice considerably more than he's going to want to keep quiet about it. He paused. Brower I know less well, but he's a Wyoming man. Wyoming men don't take well to being cheated, and if they've already been contacted by Continental Western, if Voss or whoever is operating the scheme here has already started to approach them about the competing claim, already started to offer the settlement, then they'll be angry, William said, and angry men with documentation make excellent witnesses. They were on his land now. He could tell by the fence line, by the particular quality of the grass on the north slope. He turned them toward the back approach to the ranch house, a longer route, but one that didn't pass within sight of the main gate. How much time do you think we have? He thought about Prentice leaving the hotel with his hired companion. Thought about Peterson's livery and the conversation that had almost certainly already happened. 4 hours. Generous estimate. Could be less. Then we need to get to Hendricks and Brower now. Not tomorrow. Now. I know. I'll go with you. You'll stay here. And he said it in a way that had nothing to do with her capability, which he no longer doubted, and everything to do with the calculation that needed to be made. Not because you can't handle it, because showing up at a rancher's door with a woman Prentice has been describing around town as mentally disturbed is going to cost us the first 3 minutes of a conversation we may not have 10 minutes to have. I'll get further faster without you. He looked at her. I need you here working on how we present this to Hobbs tonight, the order of the documents, the argument. He paused. That's not me pushing you aside. That's me using what you're actually best at. Victoria looked at him for a long moment. Fine. But you have 2 hours. If you're not back in 2 hours, I'm assuming something went wrong and I'm acting accordingly. What does that mean? It means, she said precisely, that I'll take the documents and the copies and the original correspondence, and I will ride to Judge Alderman's house directly without Hobbs, without introduction, and I will sit on his front porch until he sees me or has me arrested. Either outcome creates a record. She held his eyes. 2 hours. He almost smiled. 2 hours. Hendricks took 9 minutes. Not 9 minutes of convincing, 9 minutes from the moment William rode through his gate to the moment the man's face went from suspicious to furious, which was its own form of confirmation. Jonas Hendricks was 61 years old and had the weathered solidity of a man who had been tested by weather and land and time, and had decided somewhere in his 40s that he was not going to be moved by anything less than a genuine outrage. Continental Western Land Associates had contacted him in May. A representative smooth welt, using the language of legal technicality, in a way that was clearly designed to confuse, rather than clarify, had informed Hendricks that there was a question about the eastern boundary of one of his parcels, and that Continental Western, as a holder of an alternate claim, would be interested in discussing a settlement to avoid a prolonged legal dispute. Hendricks had told the representative to get off his land. The representative had left a letter. The letter was currently in Hendricks's desk unread after the first paragraph, because the first paragraph had made Hendricks angry enough that reading further seemed likely to result in the letter being set on fire. He went to the desk. He got the letter. He put it in William's hand with the force of a man filing a formal complaint. "Tell me what you need," Hendricks said. "I need you in town tonight," William said. "With this letter and anyone else you trust who's been approached by these people." "I know 3 men in this county who got the same visit," Hendricks said immediately. "Brower's one. Walsh out on the eastern edge is another. And Greer, Sam Greer at Elk Creek, he got a letter last week that near made him sick." Greer, the original valid deed holder on the water rights parcel. "They've already moved on Greer," William said. "He told me about it Sunday at church," Hendricks said. "Didn't understand half of what the letter said, but he understood enough to know someone was claiming his water. A pause. That man's family has been drinking from that creek for 6 years. You try to take a man's water in Montana in a dry summer, you'd better be prepared for what comes next. That's exactly what I'm counting on, William said. I was back on the road in 12 minutes. Brower took less time. The Wyoming man listened with his arms crossed and his jaw getting progressively tighter. And when William finished, Brower said 4 words. Where? When? What time? Tonight, William said. 7 o'clock. Hobbs' office on Courthouse Row. I'll be there. William was back at the ranch in 1 hour and 48 minutes. He told himself the 12 minutes to spare didn't matter, and that he hadn't been pushing Cutter harder than necessary on the return ride to make them. He told himself that until he saw Victoria standing in the doorway of the ranch house and the specific quality of her relief. When she saw him controlled, immediately suppressed, but real settled something in him that he hadn't known was unsettled. Hendricks is in Brower too, and apparently 3 other men in this county have already been contacted by Continental Western, including Greer. Victoria's eyes sharpened. They've already started, she said. They moved up the timeline. Yes. He dismounted and tied the horse. They must know someone has been looking at the records. Or they're getting nervous about something else. He looked at her. Or Prentice reported back faster than I thought he would. As if on cue. Teller appeared from the direction of the barn, at a walk that was careful without being a run, which meant he'd been watching for William and had something to say, but had the sense not to say it at volume. Man came to the gate, Teller said. Prentice, and another man I didn't know, asked to see you. What did you tell them? Told them you'd ridden out this morning and hadn't come back. Told them I didn't know when to expect you. A beat. Told them I'd pass along a message if they wanted to leave one. Did they leave one? Prentice left a card, Teller said. The other man didn't say anything the whole time, just looked at the house. A pause. Specifically at the windows. Victoria was very still. He was counting rooms. That's what I thought, Teller said, with the calm practicality of a young man who had concluded that whatever was happening was serious and had decided his job was to be useful rather than alarmed. William looked at Victoria. Tonight? We can't wait. We need to be at Hobbs' office before Prentice comes back here with more men. I agree. She had the portfolio under her arm. She'd been holding it, he realized, for the full 2 hours she'd been waiting. There's something I need to tell you first. While you were gone, I went back through the correspondence. She paused. I found something I missed before. He waited. There's a letter I had filed under general correspondence, she said. I'd read it before, but the significance didn't register until I was rereading it this afternoon in the context of what we found at the records office. She opened the portfolio. It's from my father to Harlan Voss, dated November 1882. It references a... She stopped, found the page, read from it directly. Our arrangement with aldermen should protect the adjudication timeline in that district sufficiently to allow full settlement before any competing claims can be litigated. The words landed. William read them again in his head to make sure he'd heard them correctly. He had. Alderman, your trusted judge. She was watching his face. William stood very still. Edmund Harrison and Harlan Voss had a judge. His judge. The judge he had been planning to approach through Hobbs tonight with the evidence that was supposed to end this. The judge who had been in their arrangement since November of 1882, which was 3.5 years ago, which was long enough to have done a great deal of useful work for men who needed the law to slow down at strategic moments. He felt the ground shift under a certainty he had been standing on, and it was an unpleasant sensation. Hobbs, when he trusted his voice again. Hobbs reports to alderman, Victoria said. Which means anything we give Hobbs tonight goes directly to alderman, which means... They'll know what we have before morning, William said. Yes. And they'll know where it came from. Yes. The fire was out in the stove. The afternoon light was going flat and long through the window. Outside somewhere down the road. Prentice and his companion were regrouping, and the clock that had been running since morning was now running faster than either of them had planned for. "All right," William said. He sat down, stood back up, moved to the window and looked at the road, and then turned back around, because looking at the road wasn't useful right now, and he needed to think. "All right, we don't use aldermen. We can't use any judge in this district if alderman's been in their pocket since 1882, because we don't know which other appointments he's influenced." "No," Victoria agreed. "We can't. Then we need a federal-level contact. Bypasses the district bench entirely." "Which brings us back to the problem I started with 8 months ago," she said quietly. "Finding a federal prosecutor who isn't already in the network, who doesn't owe anyone in my father's circle a favor, who has enough independence and enough courage to—" She stopped. Something crossed her face. Not alarm. Something else, the specific expression of a person who has just remembered something they should have thought of earlier and is simultaneously relieved and irritated with themselves for the delay. "What?" William said. "There's a man," she said slowly. "A federal land prosecutor. I came across his name in the correspondence, but not as a participant, as a problem." She looked up. "My father referred to him in a letter as the persistent nuisance in Cheyenne. His name is Calloway, Raymond Calloway. He had been investigating Northern Pacific land irregularities since 1881, and my father and Voss were specifically concerned about him reaching the Montana territories." William felt something clarify. A federal prosecutor who was already investigating them, who has been building a case since 1881, who has never had access to the kind of internal correspondence I have, Victoria said. Who knows something is wrong but can't prove the mechanism. She looked at him. "I am the mechanism." "Cheyenne is 3 days' ride," William said. "I know. Or 1 day by rail." He stopped. "But you said they'd be watching the stations. They'll be watching for a woman traveling alone. Or for Victoria Harrison specifically." She paused. "They won't be watching for a ranch owner and his—" She stopped herself. Chose her words. "For a ranch owner and a traveling companion riding together." William looked at her. A ranch owner and his wife. It was a practical suggestion. He said it as one. Victoria met his eyes. The calculation ran fast. "A ranch owner and his wife," she agreed, "wouldn't attract attention. I need to get Hendricks and the others to hold their ground," William said. "They've been contacted by Continental Western. If I'm gone 3 days, they need to know not to sign anything and not to speak to Prentice or anyone associated with him." "Tell her," Victoria said. "Can you trust him with a message?" "I can trust him with my ranch," William said, "which is what I'd be doing. I was already moving." Had coat the strong box from the back of the closet where he kept the important documents of his own. He came back to find Victoria had repacked the portfolio with a speed and precision that told him she'd been mentally repacking it since the moment she'd read that letter an hour ago. She held it out to him. He looked at it. "You should carry it. If something happens to me, you need to be able to deliver it. If something happens to you, I know where to take it without the documents." She pressed the portfolio into his hands. "Share the risk. Don't concentrate it." He took it. She was right. She was usually right about the operational pieces he was beginning to understand. 8 months of necessity had made her precise in ways that planning couldn't teach. "We leave in 20 minutes. 15. 15, he agreed. I went to find Teller. And somewhere behind them on the main road that led to Millhaven, Aldous Prentice was riding back toward the Double C Ranch with enough certainty and enough company to stop being polite about the question he'd been asking since morning. And the name of the judge he planned to use to make it official was Alderman, which was a name that could no longer protect anyone in this story, except the men who had purchased his discretion years before any of this began. They had 15 minutes. William Cooper, who had spent 20 years believing that the safest position was the one you held alone, picked up the portfolio that contained enough evidence to destroy 4 powerful men and went to put his affairs in the hands of a 22-year-old ranch hand and thought that trusting people always came with a price. He was beginning to think the price might be worth paying. And that thought was still moving through him, unfinished and complicated, when Teller appeared in the barn doorway and said that 3 riders had just turned off the main road and were coming up the double C gate at a pace that was not the pace of men paying a social call. William's hand went to the portfolio. "How far?" he said. 2 minutes, Teller said. "Maybe less. The one in front is Prentice. The other 2 I don't know." Victoria was already beside him. She'd heard. She didn't ask questions. "The back road," William said to Teller. "The one that cuts north through the Hendricks boundary. Does it stay below the ridgeline for the first half mile?" "All the way to the creek crossing," Teller said. "Then that's our way out." William handed Teller a folded piece of paper, the note he'd written 3 minutes ago at the kitchen table, quick and precise, the names of Hendricks and Brower and Greer, and the single instruction, "Tell them to hold. Sign nothing. We'll be back." "Get that to Hendricks tonight, not tomorrow, tonight." Teller took the paper without looking at it. "What do I tell Prentice?" "Tell him Mr. Cooper rode out this morning on ranch business, and you don't expect him back before Thursday." William was already moving. "Be specific about Thursday. Specific details are more believable than vague ones. And if he pushes..." "Stand in the middle of the yard and look confused," William said. "You're 22 years old on a working ranch. You have every right to know nothing about your employer's business travel. Use it." Teller nodded once. No wasted motion. He was already walking back toward the yard. William and Victoria went out the east side of the barn at a pace that was controlled and fast and quiet, and they were on horseback and moving through the back pasture before the sound of hooves on the front approach finished echoing off the fence posts. They did not look back. The train station at Cedar Fork was 11 miles north and east, far enough from Millhaven that Prentice's network of inquiries wouldn't reach it before morning, close enough that they could make it before the 9 o'clock southbound to Cheyenne. They rode hard for the first 4 miles until the ridgeline gave them cover, and William was certain no one was following. Then he pulled back to a sustainable pace and let himself breathe. Victoria was riding well. Not the way a ranchwoman rides. She'd grown up on carriage horses in Philadelphia, and there were habits of posture she couldn't entirely shake, but she'd adapted the way she adapted to everything through observation and precision, and refusal to waste motion on things that didn't matter. "The letter about Alderman," William said, after they'd been riding 15 minutes in silence. "How certain are you about the interpretation?" "I've read it 40 times, she said. "I'm certain." "Then we need to be careful in Cheyenne about who Calloway reports to. If Alderman has influenced other appointments in the territorial bench, Calloway is federal. He reports to the Department of Justice in Washington, not to the territorial circuit." She kept her eyes on the road. "That's why my father called him a nuisance. Federal prosecutors operating outside the territorial structure are harder to manage. You can't influence them through the local network. Unless someone in Washington is also reachable. Everything is possible," she said. "But Calloway has been investigating Northern Pacific irregularities for 4 years without result. That suggests he's operating without support, rather than with corrupt support. A man being actively protected by Washington doesn't go 4 years without result. He goes 4 years without investigation." William thought about that. "You've worked all this out already," he said. "I've worked all of this out at various points over 8 months in rented rooms," she said. "I've had considerable time to think, and not a great deal else to do with it." A pause. "Calloway is the right contact. I've believed that for 6 months. I just didn't know how to reach him without being intercepted first." "And now you have a ranch owner to ride with," William said. "Now I have a ranch owner to ride with," she agreed. Something in her voice was not quite wry and not quite warm. It was the tone of a woman who was allowing something she'd been refusing to allow for 8 months in small and careful increments. He didn't press it. They made the Cedar Fork station with 20 minutes to spare, and William bought 2 tickets under the name Cooper and his wife, which the station agent recorded without interest in the way that station agents record ordinary things, and they boarded the 9 o'clock southbound without incident. The car was half full. A family with 3 children near the front. 2 men who looked like cattle buyers in the middle, talking in the low, relentless way of men discussing prices. An older woman traveling alone near the back asleep before the train cleared the station. William and Victoria took seats toward the rear on the left side, which gave them a view of the car door and the aisle both. And Victoria put the portfolio on her lap, with her hands flat on top of it, and the train pulled south into the dark. For a while, neither of them spoke. The children near the front were arguing in the half-hearted way of children who were more tired than actually aggrieved, and the sound of it was ordinary and domestic, in a way that sat strangely against everything that had happened in the last 8 hours. William watched the dark outside the window and let himself decompress from the pace of the day, muscle by muscle, decision by decision. "You haven't asked about my mother," Victoria said. He turned to look at her. She was looking at the window at the dark reflected version of herself in the glass. "It didn't seem like something you wanted to talk about," he said. "It's not," she said. "But I'm going to anyway because there's something you should understand about my father that the documents don't show." She paused. "My mother died in 1875. I was 16. She had been ill for 2 years before that, and during those 2 years my father managed the illness, the doctors, the household, and his business interests simultaneously, and he managed all of it with the same quality of control." She stopped. She was a person to him, a beloved person, but she was also a managed variable. Does that make sense? "Yes," William said quietly. "When she was gone, I became the managed variable," Victoria said. "Not maliciously. That's what I want you to understand. My father is not a monster. He's a man for whom everything love, loyalty, family business exists within the same system of management and control. When I found the fraud, he managed that too. He managed it the way he managed everything else." She looked at the window. "The part that broke something in me wasn't that he chose his business over me. It was that he genuinely believed he was protecting me. He genuinely believed that the version of my life he'd arranged, the right marriage, the clean story, the buried truth, was better for me than what I was asking for." William was quiet for a moment. "And what were you asking for?" he said. She looked at him. "For it to matter that it was wrong," she said. The train swayed around a long curve. The children in the front had gone quiet. One of the cattle buyers laughed at something his companion said. "It matters," William said. She looked at him for a long moment. Something in her face was very still and very present in a way that had nothing calculated in it. "I know," she said. "That's why I'm still here." They arrived in Cheyenne at 6:30 in the morning. Gray light and the smell of coal smoke, and a city that was already awake in the way that territorial capitals are always awake, with the business of importance happening before most people were dressed for it. William knew Cheyenne well enough. He'd come through twice on cattle business, knew the layout of the streets near the federal buildings, knew the hotels that were clean and anonymous enough to be useful. He got them a room at the Frontier House, under the Cooper name. 2 floors up, corner position, which Victoria approved without comment, because it gave sightlines in 3 directions. She slept for 3 hours. I didn't sleep at all. He sat in the chair by the window with the portfolio on the table beside him and thought about Teller back at the Double C delivering notes to men who had been cheated, and Prentice at his ranch door with his 2 companions, and whatever official-looking document he'd managed to obtain from Alderman before William could stop it, and the water on Elk Creek running lower every dry week, and a federal prosecutor named Raymond Calloway, who had been calling himself a nuisance in Washington for 4 years, and didn't know yet that the thing he needed had just arrived on the 9 o'clock southbound from Cedar Fork. Victoria woke at 10 o'clock and sat up with the immediate alertness of someone whose sleep was always half listening. She was dressed and had her hair pinned and the portfolio in her hand before William had finished saying good morning. "Calloway's office," she said. "Federal building on Capitol Avenue," William said. "I checked with the desk clerk downstairs. He's in residence. Cheyenne is his base of operations." "Does he know we're coming?" "Nobody knows we're coming," William said. "That's the advantage we have right now, and I'd like to keep it until we're standing in front of him." She nodded. They went. Raymond Calloway was a man of 51, with iron gray hair and the patient, slightly worn expression of someone who had been right about something for a very long time and had grown accustomed to not being believed about it. His office was functional and somewhat crowded with files, and when his clerk showed them in, William had given his name as a rancher from Millhaven County, with information pertaining to Northern Pacific land irregularities, which was the kind of phrase that unlocked federal office doors. Calloway looked up from his desk with the expression of a man who had heard many versions of many things and was deciding in the first 3 seconds whether this was one more or something different. His eyes moved from William to Victoria, stayed on Victoria. "Miss Harrison," he said. The air in the room changed. Victoria went very still. "You know who I am," she said. "I have known who you are," Calloway said carefully, "since January of this year, when a source inside the Harrison household told me that Edmund Harrison's daughter had left Philadelphia with what was believed to be copied financial correspondence pertaining to the Northern Pacific land scheme." He set down his pen. "I've been trying to find you for 6 months." William looked at Victoria. Her face was unreadable, which he was beginning to understand meant she was processing something that required the full capacity of her composure to absorb without reacting to. "Your source," she said. "Who?" Calloway shook his head. "I won't give you that name, but I'll tell you it's someone who has been providing me information about this scheme for 2 years, and who was very concerned about what happened to you when you left." "Someone in the house," Victoria said slowly, and then very quietly, "Mrs. Aldgate." Calloway didn't confirm or deny, but something in his stillness was itself a kind of answer. Mrs. Aldgate had been her mother's personal secretary and had stayed on after her mother's death, managing the household correspondence with the invisible competence of a woman who had made herself indispensable and therefore untouchable. Victoria had trusted her completely and had not once in 8 months of running thought to wonder whether the trust ran the other direction. "She's been feeding you information," Victoria said. "For 2 years, Calloway said. She doesn't have access to financial documents, your father is careful about that. But she has access to correspondence, to the pattern of meetings, to the names of the men who come and go. It's been enough to build a structural understanding of the scheme without sufficient documented evidence to act on it." He looked at the portfolio in Victoria's hands. "Until now, I assume." Victoria set the portfolio on his desk. 60 pages of copied correspondence, she said. Financial records tracing the fraudulent transfers. 8 months of additional documentation I gathered in transit. And, she looked at William, certified copies of county deed records from Millhaven County, Montana, showing dual transfers on 3 parcels, including the Elk Creek water rights, which is the leverage they intend to use in the 3rd week of August. Calloway opened the portfolio. He read in silence for 4 minutes. Not skimming, actually reading, his eyes tracking back across lines to confirm what they'd seen, his pen moving occasionally to make a small notation in his own papers. When he looked up, something in his face had changed. The patient weariness was still there, but something under it had shifted into something sharper. "The alderman reference," he said, "in the November letter." "Yes," Victoria said. "That's going to be useful in ways that go beyond your father's case," Calloway said. "I've had reason to suspect Alderman's arrangement with the Northern Pacific land interests for 18 months. I've had nothing I could use." He looked at the letter again. "Until now." "How long will it take," William said, "to act on what she's brought you?" Calloway looked at him for the first time since they'd sat down. He was assessing the way men in his profession assessed not for threat, but for reliability. For what category of witness William Cooper occupied. "That depends on what you mean by act," Calloway said. "A formal complaint and an injunction against Continental Western's claims in Millhaven County. I can file that within 24 hours, and once it's filed, the competing deeds are frozen pending investigation. No settlements can be legally completed. The leverage they've been building disappears." "That's the first step," Victoria said. "The first step," Calloway agreed. "The full case, federal charges against Edmund Harrison Harlan Voss, the principals of Continental Western, and the associated parties, that's months, possibly longer. These things move at their own pace, and the opposition will be well-funded and well-lawyered." He paused. "But the injunction I can file today." "There's a problem," Victoria said. Calloway waited. "Prentice," she said. "The man my father sent to Montana. He's there now. He knows I've been at the Double C Ranch. He's been to the gate." She paused. He has legal cover through Alderman's network, which means he may have a writ or a warrant by now, something that looks official and gives him standing to pressure the ranchers who hold the fraudulent second deeds. If he has a writ from Alderman, Calloway said, and I file the federal injunction today, the writ becomes legally void the moment the injunction is recorded. He looked at his watch. It is currently 10:47 in the morning. The federal recorder's office opens at 8 and closes at 5. I need 2 hours to prepare the filing. He looked up. I can have this on record by 2 o'clock this afternoon. Victoria did the calculation out loud. Prentice will have been at the ranch since last night. If he has a writ and he's using it to pressure Hendricks or Brower or Greer to accept a settlement, and the injunction isn't recorded until 2 o'clock. The ranchers need to hold until 2 o'clock, William said. Teller gave them the note, Victoria said. But Teller didn't know about Alderman. He didn't know Prentice might arrive with something that looked like legal authority. She looked at William. If Prentice shows them a writ from a district judge and tells them the competing claim is legally established and their only option is to settle immediately or face extended litigation, they might. Hendricks won't settle, William said. He believed it absolutely. He told that man to get off his property in May. A piece of paper from a judge isn't going to change that. Hendricks has been a citizen of this territory for 16 years, and he knows the difference between a legitimate legal proceeding and a man in a good coat waving paper. Brower, Wyoming man, William said. Same answer. Greer, Victoria said quietly. Greer is the one I'm worried about. He's not a confrontational man, and it's his water. William was already standing. I need to send a telegram, he said. To Teller, specifically about Greer. Tell him to get to Greer's property today before Prentice does if possible, and tell Greer in plain terms that a federal injunction is being filed this afternoon, and that any settlement signed before it's recorded is legally contestable. He looked at Calloway. Can I tell him that? You can tell him that, Calloway said. William moved towards the door, turned back. 2 o'clock, he said. You'll have it filed by 2 o'clock. By 2 o'clock, Calloway confirmed. William went. He sent the telegram from the office on 3rd Street addressed to Teller at the Double C, keeping it short and factual because telegrams were not private documents, and he didn't know who else might be reading the wire traffic in Millhaven. He said enough and not more, and he trusted Teller to understand enough and act on it because that was the quality of the young man he'd hired 4 years ago, and it hadn't failed him yet. He was back at Calloway's office in 35 minutes. Victoria was still there. She and Calloway had moved from the desk to the long table on the side wall where the portfolio contents were now spread in an ordered sequence that was clearly Victoria's arrangement rather than Calloway's. She'd organized it in the order of presentation, the way a lawyer organizes a case file before a hearing. Calloway was making notes. Victoria was explaining the provenance of each document group with the precision and confidence of someone who had been preparing this presentation in her head for 8 months. William stood in the doorway for a moment before either of them noticed him. He watched Calloway, the experienced federal prosecutor, listening to a 25-year-old woman who had no legal standing, no official title, no formal authority in any room in any territory, and who had nevertheless spent 8 months building the most detailed documentary case Calloway had probably seen in 12 years of pursuing this particular network. He watched Calloway's pen move faster as Victoria spoke. He watched the prosecutor stop asking questions and start taking dictation. She was remarkable. Not in the way people use that word to soften a compliment. Remarkable in the original sense. The kind of thing that demands to be remarked upon, that changes the quality of the air in a room and makes everyone in it understand that something different is happening. Victoria looked up and saw him in the doorway. The telegram, she said. Sent, he said. Teller will handle it. She nodded and turned back to Calloway, because there was more to do, and she had learned in 8 months of necessity that relief was a luxury to be allowed only after the thing was finished. Calloway filed the injunction at 1:58 in the afternoon. William knew the exact time because he was standing at the recorder's counter when the clerk stamped the document and the clock on the wall behind the clerk read 1:58, and he noted it the way he noted everything that mattered precisely without ceremony. Continental Western Land Associates' competing claims on all three Millhaven County parcels were frozen pending federal investigation. The Elk Creek water rights, the Hendricks parcel, the Brower parcel. All three frozen. No settlement legally binding. No transfer completable. The leverage my father and Harlan Voss had been building toward their August meeting was gone. He went back to Calloway's office and told Victoria. She was standing at the window when he came in. She had her back to the door. He told her the time. 1:58. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "It's not over." "No," William agreed. "It's not. The full case could take a year. My name isn't cleared yet. My father hasn't been charged yet. Alderman is still on the bench, and Prentice is still in Millhaven." She paused. "None of the large things are finished." "No," William said. "But the ranchers in this county are protected. Greer's water is protected, and Calloway has what he needs to build the rest of it." He moved to stand beside her at the window. "You did that. All of that. Today." She turned to look at him. There were things in her face he hadn't seen before. Not new things, but things that the constant motion of the last weeks had kept covered the way wind keeps water from settling. She looked tired. Not broken, she didn't break easily. He was certain of that now, in the same way he was certain of the sound of his own ranch in the morning. But tired in the specific way of someone who has been carrying a thing alone for a long time, and has just for the first time set it down somewhere solid. "I don't know what comes next," she said. "For me specifically, my name is still—" She stopped. "Calloway will file a formal statement through the Department of Justice," William said. "The original complaint against you was a private filing coordinated through Gillespie, who is now a named party in a federal fraud case. When that becomes public record, the complaint against you becomes part of the evidence against them, not evidence against you. You talked to Calloway about this while I was at the window." "I did," he said. She looked at him for a long moment. "You negotiated my situation," she said carefully. "Not accusatory. Something more complicated than accusation." "I asked the questions you were too exhausted to ask," he said. "Because you've been asking all the questions for 8 months, and you deserve to have someone ask them on your behalf for 15 minutes. He held her gaze. "If I was out of line, tell me." She was quiet. "You weren't out of line," she said quietly. It cost her something. Not because she resented it, but because she wasn't accustomed to being the one who received the asking. "Thank you." He nodded. "We need to go back," she said. "To Millhaven. I need to see this through there. Make sure Prentice leaves. Make sure the ranchers understand what the injunction means. Make sure Teller is all right." She straightened. "And I need to talk to Greer myself. About the creek. About what's coming in the case. He deserves to hear it from someone directly." "Tomorrow morning's northbound leaves at 6, William said. "Then we should sleep," she said. "Yes," he agreed. She started for the door, stopped. "William." She said his name more easily now, like something that had found its natural place in her mouth. "What you said about your father. Earlier you mentioned a long time ago circumstances you don't revisit often." She looked at him over her shoulder. "You don't have to tell me." "No," he said. "I don't." She waited. "My father made a land deal when I was 15, he said, with a man who turned out to hold a fraudulent claim on an adjacent parcel. My father lost a year of investment and 2 years of trust in himself." He paused. "It was not the same scale as your father's scheme, but it was the same shape." He looked at her. "That's why I know the survey format. And that's why I recognized what you were describing before you finished describing it." She was quiet for a moment. "Did he recover?" she said. "Your father?" "He built the double C," William said. "So yes." She nodded slowly. "Then it's possible," she said. "Not about his father. He understood that." "It's possible," William said. She went. He stood at the window where she'd been standing and looked at Cheyenne going about its afternoon ordinary and continuous. And he thought about 15 minutes in Calloway's office, negotiating the dissolution of a false complaint against a woman who had every right to dissolve it herself, but had been running too long to remember she was allowed to stop and let someone else hold the door. He thought about 1:58 on the recorder's clock. I thought about Elk Creek running lower in the July heat, and Greer's family, and their 6 years of water, and the specific sound Victoria Harrison's voice made when it was doing something other than calculating. He thought that tomorrow morning they would be on the northbound to Cedar Fork and then back to Millhaven, and then whatever came after Millhaven, and that none of the large things were finished exactly as she'd said. He thought that he didn't mind. I thought that was the most important thing he'd learned in a very long day. I thought that was the most important thing he'd learned in a very long day, and he carried that thought with him onto the 6 o'clock northbound the next morning, sitting across from Victoria Harrison in the gray pre-dawn light of the Cheyenne station as the train shuddered and pulled north, and thinking that a man could spend 20 years building walls around himself and still be surprised by how quickly the right person found the door. Victoria didn't sleep on the return journey. She sat with the portfolio on her laplighter. Now, the copies left with Calloway, the originals safely distributed between the two of them, and she looked at the country going past the window with the expression of someone seeing it differently than they had 2 days before. Not relaxed. She wasn't built for relaxed, and he was beginning to understand that wasn't a flaw. It was the shape of her. But something had shifted in the quality of her alertness. It was still precise, still ready, but it was no longer braced entirely against the world. There was a fraction of it now that was simply looking. He thought about what Calloway had said when William had come back to the office after sending the telegram. The prosecutor had looked up from his notes and said without preamble, "She built this case without legal training, without institutional support, and under active threat of criminal complaint for 8 months. You understand what that means?" "Yes," William had said. "Do you understand what it's going to mean when it's finished?" Calloway had said. "When this goes to federal court, and Edmund Harrison's lawyers are looking for ways to discredit the evidence, the first thing they'll attack is the chain of custody and the credibility of the person who collected it." "I understand." "The department will do what it can to shield her," Calloway had said. "But she needs to be prepared for it to get significantly worse before it gets better. Tell her that yourself," William had said. "She'll want to hear it directly, not through me. She doesn't appreciate information being filtered." Calloway had looked at him for a moment. "You've known her less than 2 weeks, Calloway said. "Yes," William agreed. "You seem to know her fairly well for less than 2 weeks. William had not answered that because he didn't have an answer that would have been appropriate in a federal prosecutor's office in Cheyenne, Wyoming at 2:30 in the afternoon. But he thought about it on the train. They pulled into Cedar Fork at 4:30 in the afternoon, and William had horses waiting at the livery there. He'd arranged it by telegram from Cheyenne. One of the 3 telegrams he'd sent that he hadn't mentioned to Victoria, because 2 of them were operational, and 1 of them was personal, and he wasn't ready to explain the personal one yet. They were back on Double C land by 6 o'clock. Teller was in the yard when they rode in, and the look on his face when he saw them was the look of a young man who had been holding something difficult together by the force of his own composure and was extremely relieved to hand it back. "Prentice came back yesterday morning," Teller said, "with a document. Looked official, had a court seal on it. He went to Greer first." Victoria's hands tightened on the reins. "Greer," she said. "I got there first," Teller said. 20 minutes before Prentice. Told Greer exactly what you said to tell him. He didn't sign anything." A pause. "He wanted to. Prentice had 2 men with him, and they made it clear the offer wasn't going to improve. But Greer held." Teller looked at his boots for a moment, then back up. "He held because of what you said about the water. I told him the federal injunction was being filed that afternoon. I told him if he waited until 2 o'clock his water was protected." He paused. He waited. Victoria looked at Teller with an expression that William had only seen on her face twice before, both times when something had reached through the calculation and found the person underneath it. "Thank you," she said. "That was well done." Teller accepted this with a nod because he was a young man who understood that some moments required economy. "Prentice left last night," he added. After Hendricks told him the injunction had been filed, Prentice went back to the hotel in town. This morning he was gone. "Gone where?" William said. "Don't know. But he checked out before 7, and the livery said he rode east. not north to the station. Teller paused. That seemed like something worth noting. East. Not toward Cedar Fork and the northbound train. East toward Billings, which was toward the telegraph office, which was toward the people who needed to know that everything they'd been building toward August had just been legally frozen by a federal injunction filed out of Cheyenne. East meant Prentice was reporting back, which meant Harlan Voss and Edmund Harrison now knew what had happened and what was coming and who had brought it. William and Victoria looked at each other across the yard. "Inside," William said. "Not a question." She told him the rest of it over coffee that night. The parts she hadn't told him yet, the parts she'd been carrying in the layer beneath the operational facts, the things that were true but didn't help with anything, and therefore had been filed under later until later finally arrived. She told him about the morning she'd left Philadelphia. The 3 o'clock darkness of her father's house, the bag she'd packed with the specificity of someone who had been planning for 2 weeks but still made choices. She regretted before she reached the bottom of the stairs. The letter she'd left on the hall table. "What did you write?" William said. "I told him I loved him, and that I was sorry the truth was inconvenient." She paused. "I've thought about that letter many times since, whether it was the right thing to say, whether I meant it." She looked at her hands. "I think I did mean it, both parts, which is the most uncomfortable thing about it." "Can you love someone and still hold them accountable for what they've done?" William said. "That's exactly the question." She looked up. "I've decided the answer is yes, but I'm not sure the world agrees with me yet." "The world takes its time catching up," William said. She almost smiled. He pushed further because the night was quiet, and she seemed ready in a way she hadn't been before. "What do you want when this is finished? Not what needs to happen. What do you want?" She was quiet for a long moment. "I want to not be running. I want to be somewhere long enough that I can learn the names of things, the plants, the birds." A pause. "I'm a woman who was trained to manage a household, and instead spent 8 months learning to sleep with one ear open and keep a horse's shoes checked every other day." Something in her voice was dry, but not bitter. "I want to find out what I'm actually good at when I'm not running for my life." "You're good at land records," William said, "and financial fraud, and making cases that experienced federal prosecutors find credible. That's a specific set of skills." "It's a remarkable set of skills," William said, "in a territory where half the land transactions of the last decade are going to need to be reviewed before the Northern Pacific case closes." He looked at her steadily. "Calloway said as much. He said the department is going to need people who understand the scheme from the inside, who can look at a deed record and identify in 3 minutes whether it's clean." Victoria was very still. "He said that. He said it while you were at the window," William said. "I told you I asked questions." She looked at him. The expression was complicated and precise, and doing several things simultaneously, and he'd learned enough about her by now to let it run its course, rather than try to read it too quickly. "He's offering me a role in the investigation, formally through the department, under his supervision, which means under federal protection, while the case is active." William paused. "Not in Cheyenne necessarily. It would make more sense to have you in the territory where the documentation is being cross-referenced." She understood what he was saying. "In Millhaven, or close to it." Another silence. The fire had settled to a low, steady burn, and outside the July night was warm and dry, and the crickets that had gone quiet 10 days ago when she'd been crouched behind his fence post had come back in full voice, indifferent to everything that had happened in the interval. "That's a very convenient arrangement for a ranch owner who knows all the land records in this county." "It is," William agreed. He didn't look away. "I'm aware of that. You're not even slightly embarrassed about it." "I am slightly embarrassed about it. I'm choosing not to let the embarrassment interfere with the practical point." Victoria Harrison looked at him across the table, and for a moment the careful architecture of her composure, the thing she'd built and maintained across 8 months and 2,000 miles, and a father's betrayal and a federal fraud scheme, and a man with a photograph asking about visitors at ranch gates. For a moment, it simply rested. She wasn't guarded, and she wasn't calculating, and she wasn't running or holding or bracing. She was just a woman sitting across a table from a man who had found her at his gate in the dark and hadn't once asked her to be smaller than she was. "I'll think about it. That's enough." 3 days later, a letter arrived from Calloway. William was in the barn when Teller brought it to him, and he read it standing up, which was how he always read things that mattered, because sitting down to read bad news made it feel like the news had you, and he preferred to maintain the option of moving. The letter was not bad news. It was a formal communication from the Department of Justice, countersigned by Calloway, advising that the formal complaint filed against Victoria Eloise Harrison by Arthur Gillespie of the Eastern District was hereby suspended pending investigation of Gillespie's conduct in relation to the Northern Pacific land fraud case, and that all parties were advised that any further action against Miss Harrison on the basis of said complaint would be considered obstruction of an active federal investigation. Suspended. Not dismissed yet, that would come later with the full case. But suspended was different from active. Suspended meant no one could legally do anything with it while the investigation ran. He brought the letter to the house. Victoria was at the office table where she'd been working for 3 days on the organizational structure of the case documentation. Calloway had asked for it formatted in a specific way for the federal filing, and she'd taken to the task with the focused efficiency of someone who had found the exact work that fit the exact shape of her mind. He set the letter on the table beside her. She read it again, set it down. She pressed her hands flat on the table, the way she did when she was absorbing something that required her full composure to receive correctly. Suspended. For now, William said. Calloway said dismissed is coming once the case is formally charged. She nodded. Her jaw was very tight. Are you all right? Yes. A pause. No. Another pause. I've been waiting for something to go right for 8 months. It turns out that when something does, it takes a moment to... She stopped. It takes a moment. He pulled out the chair across her and sat down. He didn't say anything. He'd learned that her silences were working silences, and that talking into them was the conversational equivalent of stepping on something careful. After a minute, she said, "My father is going to be charged." Yes, Harlan Voss is going to be charged. Alderman is going to be removed from the bench. Gillespie is going to lose his appointment. She looked at the letter. Continental Western is going to be dissolved, and the fraudulent deeds declared void, and Greer is going to keep his water, and Hendricks and Brower are going to have clear title to their land. Yes, William said, all of that. And my father, she said very quietly, is going to stand in a federal court, and the truth is going to be the truth, and there is nothing he can manage or control about that. She stopped. I wanted that for 8 months. I still want it. And it is also going to be the hardest thing I've ever done. I know, William said. She looked at him. How do you know? Because you're someone who loved him, William said. And someone who loved him and still brought these documents all the way to Cheyenne is someone who is going to feel both things at once when it finishes. The rightness of it, and the grief of it. He held her eyes. That's not a contradiction. That's just the truth being complicated. Victoria Harrison looked at him for a long time. You're a very different kind of man than I expected to find at a ranch gate in Montana. You're a very different kind of woman than most people would expect to find hiding behind a fence post in the dark. She looked at her hands, then back at him. I'm going to accept Calloway's offer. The role in the investigation. Good. I'm going to need somewhere to stay while the case is active. Something more permanent than a rented room in town. She paused, very precisely. Within reasonable distance of the county records office. William looked at her. There's a foreman's room at the end of the hall. It locks from the inside. I remember. It comes with coffee in the morning. The real kind. I have strong feelings about chicory. I know. So do I. Something happened in her face. Then, a real smile. Not the ghost of one. Not the escape valve of reluctant amusement, but a full and unguarded smile that reached all the way to her eyes and stayed there for a moment before she remembered herself, and it settled back into something quieter. But it had been there. He'd seen it. He thought he would like to see it again. 2 weeks later, Samuel Greer came to the Double C. He was a lean, weathered man of about 50, with hands that showed his years and eyes that were direct in the way of people who had never learned to be otherwise. He came alone, which said something about his character, and he tied his horse at the post and took off his hat when Victoria came to the door, which said something else. "Miss Harrison." "Mr. Greer." She stepped out onto the porch. "Come in." He sat at the kitchen table, and he told her about the morning the Continental Western representative had come to his door with the letter about the competing claim on the Elk Creek parcel. He told it without melodrama, the way men who have survived difficult things often tell them plainly, the details doing the work without the emotions being narrated. But his hands on the table told the rest. They were very still, in a way that hands are still when they've been through something and are still carrying the weight of it. "I've watered my cattle from that creek for 6 years. My wife grew her kitchen garden from that creek. My children learned to swim in it." He paused. "When that man told me someone else owned it, He stopped. "I didn't know what to do with that. The land is one thing, the water is something else." Victoria looked at him steadily. "The injunction protects your claim. The original deed your family holds is the valid one. Continental Western's competing claim will be declared void when the federal case resolves." She paused. "That may take several more months, but the outcome is not in question." "Teller told me you went to Cheyenne yourself," Greer said, "with the documents." "We did," Victoria said. Greer looked at her for a moment. Then he looked at William, who was standing near the window in the way he stood when he was listening without wanting to seem like he was listening. "I want to ask you something," Greer said to Victoria. "And I want you to know I mean it in the plainest, most respectful way possible." "Ask." "Why did you do it?" Greer said. "You came out here carrying something that was your own trouble, your own fight. You didn't know me. You didn't know Hendricks or Brower. You could have just kept going." He paused. "Plenty of people would have." Victoria was quiet for a moment. "My mother used to say that the truth doesn't belong to the person who found it," she said. "It belongs to everyone it affects." She looked at her hands. "The fraud that my father built it doesn't stop at the men who were sold fraudulent claims. It doesn't stop at the families who might have lost their water or their grazing land. A system that allows this in 4 territories allows it in 8, allows it in 20. The only way to actually stop it is to make it visible." She paused. "And I was the person who could do that. There wasn't anyone else." Greer looked at her for a long moment. Then he reached into his coat and set something on the table. It was a small glass bottle of water, plain clean, sealed with a cork. He set it carefully, like it was something important. "From Elk Creek. I thought you should have it." He stood up. "So you know what you were fighting for." He put his hat back on, and he left, and Victoria sat at the kitchen table with the small bottle of water in her hands, and the afternoon light came through the window, and the ranch was quiet around her. William didn't say anything for a while. Then she looked up at him, and her eyes were bright in a way that she didn't try to conceal. "He brought me creek water." "Yes," William said. "That's..." She looked at the bottle. "That's the kindest thing anyone has done for me in a very long time." William looked at her. At the woman who had walked into a federal prosecutor's office with 60 pages of evidence, and the quiet authority of someone who had been right about something for 8 months and refused to stop being right about it, simply because being right was costing her everything. At the woman who had mended tack in his barn and pulled county deed records with 30 seconds to spare, and negotiated the terminology of her own legal protection without raising her voice once. At the woman who was now sitting at his kitchen table holding a bottle of creek water like it was something precious, because a man she'd helped keep his water had decided that was the right way to say thank you. "He's not wrong," William said, "about what you fought for." She looked at him. "I know what I fought for," she said quietly. And then even more quietly, in the way of someone who is being careful with a truth. "They've only recently let themselves have, I know what I found too." The room was very still. "Victoria," William said, just her name. But it had the weight of everything in it, the fence post and the coffee and the 2 hours and the train and Cheyenne and the key that might not have been exactly the right key and the telegram to Teller and Greer's water, and a federal injunction filed at 158, and the foreman's room at the end of the hall that locked from the inside. She stood up. She set the bottle of creek water on the windowsill, where the afternoon light came through it, and scattered small pieces of brightness across the kitchen floor. She walked to him and stopped. Not close enough to be a declaration. Close enough to be a question. I stopped running. 3 weeks ago when you found me at the gate, I didn't know that's what I was doing, but I stopped. I know. This isn't convenient, she said. My name isn't cleared yet. The case is months from resolution. My father's lawyers are going to be thorough and relentless, and they're going to make things difficult before they get better. She looked at him directly. I am not a simple thing to choose. I'm aware, William said. I'm telling you in case you hadn't considered it fully. I've considered it, fully and at some length. And I've spent 20 years choosing the simplest possible version of everything, William said. And it made me a very successful rancher who sat alone in a very well-managed house. He held her eyes. I'm not particularly interested in simple anymore. Victoria Harrison looked at him, and the last thing she'd been holding, the final thinnest layer of armor she'd built against the particular danger of being known quietly, came down. All right. Not all right to the ranch, or to Calloway's offer, or to any specific thing they hadn't named. All right to the whole of it, the complication and the cost and the morning coffee and the county deed records and whatever came next in a story that was still very much in progress. It was enough. William Cooper, who had spent 20 years believing that trusting people always came with a price, reached out and took her hand. And discovered that some prices are not costs at all. They are simply what it feels like when you finally stop holding back from the life that was waiting for you all along.